I'm worried. Cars now are for the rich. Let's cut to the chase. Today's going to be a little more of a candid conversation about what's going on in the car market. I mean, with the average car loan costing $700, almost $800 a month, that's for the pitzly little cars. With over 18% of car loans exceeding $1,000 a month. I walked into a car shop lately. I looked at a new Toyota RAV4 Prime, and they handed me an invoice for $75,000 if I was willing to pay for $14,000 worth of paint protection film and undercoating. The car market has literally become an abomination. Prices are way too high. Consumers don't have the money. And when we look at certain manufacturers, without calling them out, in my opinion, like Stellantis, who now claim that they're going upmarket, upscale, and they're selling their products to a different type of clientele, they've clearly missed the mark. We know Jeeps traditionally were affordable. They were vehicles made for people like you and I, middle class, lunchbox Joe, get in our Jeep, go have fun on the weekend, nice utilitarian vehicle, and it was all done affordably. A high school kid with a part-time job on the weekends was able to afford a slightly used Jeep. But things have changed drastically. And now not only are you finding Jeep TJs, which is intended to be a Willys product by very fundamental design, a very simple bucket of a vehicle with a small engine up front, is now gone from a $15,000 asset up to an $80,000 commodity. Who's got that kind of money? And I know I get comments all the time. Suck it up, Buttercup. Earn, work, you'll be able to afford it. Well, that's not entirely true. Because even the cheapest of cheap vehicles, we look at a lot of the cheap entry-level vehicles are being discontinued. So those vehicles that once were bargain basement, and although you can still find the odd Kia or the odd Nissan product that is relatively affordable, and I say relatively, really those vehicles are really only intended for no families, maybe single drivers, maybe a single passenger, but a lot of them are smaller cars, smaller SUVs, and often, lack the technical aptitude or the ability, if you will, to actually get a family around. Family people, like you and I, most of us often, maybe we have kids, wife, family, whatever, and we need something a little bit larger. Now, not everybody needs these overgrown pickup trucks, but that's another bone of contention. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking for Ram, which we know is one of the highest priced pickup trucks in the market today. They used to be number 1, 2, 3 in terms of popularity, Ford being the first best-selling, GM and Chevy. If you're from a small country town, you'd go Chevy. And of course, the third was the optional. Well, they wanted something different, they would buy a Ram. But now Ram's the highest price of the bunch. But we can't forget about Ford and GM because they've also cranked their prices up to an extraordinarily high number. Do you remember some of those airplanes that used to fly at 30,000 feet, 28,000 feet? Have you ever been flying? It used to be at 28,000 feet. But now when you get on an airplane, now often they're flying at 35, 38,000 feet. Well, that's what's going on here. They're going higher and higher and higher, and you wonder where the limit and the roof is here. Because quite frankly, for a half-ton pickup truck that costs $90,000, there's not a lot of people that can actually afford that. When we actually consider the average household income to be only in that $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 combined income between a husband and wife as they share resources, don't forget, they're trying to busy paying for rent, a mortgage that they can't even afford these days because the cost of living crisis is getting the best of everybody. McDonald's isn't selling products anymore because people realized it's garbage. It tastes like cardboard, kind of tastes like this, and yet they're charging in Canadian dollars. If you've been there, you'll know $13, $14 for a Big Mac combo when merely 12 years ago, that same meal was $5. Inflation's not the answer. These manufacturers are using greedflation, one solely and solely only. I mean, when we look at inflation, year over year, core inflation rates going up by 2, 3, 4% year over year over year. We would expect 2019 to have a number here. Vehicles, trucks, for example. You could find a fully loaded, well, not a fully loaded, but a good spec 4x4 crew cab, full-size pickup truck. Didn't matter whether it was Ford, GM, as well as Ram. And you could have found those in that 2018, 2019 model year. And you could have bought those for a quite affordable number. $40,000, $45,000 got you a truck like that. But now, interestingly enough, that same truck is up at $75,000, $80,000, at least Canadian funds. And I know a lot of people critique me on my comments. Hey, whoa, how did $120,000 for that diesel truck? Yes, that's Canadian dollars, but it's still, we're in that six-figure range. And American dollars, you're talking $100,000. You're tapping $100,000 to get into a worker's pickup truck. That's right, a 3,500 with a diesel engine and maybe a pair of leather seats, and now you're paying $100,000. How did we get here? Yes, the cost of living crisis is legit. And with people paying $1,000, $1,200, I'm seeing car payments in $1,500, $1,800 a month now just to drive a vehicle like a truck or a full-size SUV. It just makes no sense. And in most cases, people just don't have the money. When we look at people taking home $4,000 worth of income, $2,000 of that's going to a mortgage, $1,000 of that's going to daily living, and they have now all of a sudden a $1,000 car payment, there's no buffer. A lot of people are getting way in over their head. And now, okay, you say, well, it's not all over but the crying. You can always buy a used car. Absolutely. But if you've been following the channel, then you'll recognize I've been trying to provide some advice and some guidance on the market, where the market's at with new vehicles, because I love to share and expose some of the numbers, the hard dollar numbers. It's one thing to talk all kinds of noise. It's another thing to say, hey, it's good time. It's good. It's another thing to pull up statistics. But it's another thing when rubber hits the road and you're out in the field and you're looking at that sticker on the side of the vehicle and the dealers have got you cornered and it's just little old you and you're going into a shark tank in terms of negotiations. You've got the bottom hand. They've always got the upper hand. I guess we can speak with our wallets, right? Because the used car segment is a really, really odd space. Now, there was a time when you could buy a used vehicle and you thought, I could get a great deal. Depreciation was a factor that would work in the buyer's favor. It was always a losing proposition for a person who bought that vehicle new because they knew after 3 or 4 years that vehicle was worth it would lose 40 to 50% of its value in that first handful of years. But oddly enough, we've seen a flip in the market which continually enhances and just crushes the consumer time and time again. Because now what we're finding are vehicles that aren't a total piece of crap, like a Chevy Cruze or some of these 3-cylinder vehicles, but things that are actually somewhat worth owning. Late model vehicles, 40,000 miles on it, 3 years old. And a lot of people and dealers are asking 95% and in some cases over the new price because it meant they didn't have to wait. How did we even get to a place like this? Well, obviously dealerships, OEMs, manufacturers, they learned that consumers just are all about enveloping the next latest and greatest. They want the next shiny toy, and they're willing to pay for it. And the problem is people don't exercise restraint. And because of that lack of exercising a restraint, people were overpaying. And as a result of that, during 2020, 2021, and 22, we saw quite a dramatic shift where all of a sudden you couldn't get that base vehicle on the lot. You couldn't get that base truck. You couldn't get that base Jeep. You couldn't get that base car. And we're seeing that even today because a lot of dealers, not even dealers, the manufacturers are now eliminating the bottom feeder cars, the low-cost vehicles, the entry-level vehicles from their portfolios. And they're doing that because the profit margins are slim. But rather, they know people are going to step up. They know that the banks have a lot of money, and this is all going to come to a crashing halt here. As we roll into a recession, almost depression, we've never seen numbers like this. We've never seen a place where people are now willing to walk away default. This is happening at an alarming rate. Repossessions are skyrocketing. But a lot of it's because people are getting in over their head. They're living beyond their means. And a lot of these dealers know it. The manufacturers know this, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. The consumers have enabled this behavior because by overpaying for everything, these manufacturers quickly realized, wait a minute, we don't need to sell that entry-level crap because we've got to put a lot of the same entry-level technology or the base electrics, the modules, the chips. As we know, chip shortages were a function, and they were rationing the chips for quite some time. So instead of putting a chip and all that electrics into a vehicle with a $2,000 margin, why not put it into a premium, fully loaded, full-size upscale SUV where you've got a $18,000 margin, right? Seems like a great business model. And that was happening. And it's absolutely absurd to me to see people get into hock for a vehicle that is an absolute brutal depreciating asset for 84 months, 96 months. I don't even care if it's 60 months. That's almost too long. Because after 60 months and 5 years, that vehicle's worth less than half. Okay, so you pay $100,000, it's now worth 50 grand in 5 years. But in 5 years, if you're lucky, you've paid it off. And now you've got a vehicle you've dumped $50,000 in depreciation. And possibly warranty's usually gone in 3 years, so now you've probably thrown another 10 grand into servicing and maybe a new set of tires and brakes because now you're outside of that typical warranty space. And now you're into that $100,000 vehicle for $130,000 because you've got $10,000 in interest charges, $20,000 or sorry, $15,000 to $20,000 interest charges and another $10K on upgrades. You've got $130K and all you got is 50 grand to show for it if you can even sell it. And we're all worried about putting money into our 401ks, savings, taking those vacations. People are worried that they can't afford to eat, they can't afford rent, and they're willing to throw $70,000, $80,000 out the window in 5 short years. And the OEMs, the manufacturers know this because we're seeing people continue to buy. Now, yes, we are seeing a trend. New car sales are down, new truck sales are down. We're seeing manufacturers are starting to turn a leaf here. They're starting to have to make adjustments. They have to make concessions. We're seeing that sales are drastically down on new vehicles. Incentives are up. They're offering big discounts. All kinds of money back. They're giving you 0% even when we know the bank rate's not 0%. But they're giving you 0% to give you this perception of 0% financing. But you're going to pay for that anyway. Because if you're getting 0% and we know the bank rate's at 5%, you're not getting 0%. You're paying for it on the core value of that vehicle. So what does this all mean? This all means to me that people continue to spend over what they can actually afford. Sure, yes, we're seeing prices slowly creep down. Sure, yes, we're seeing manufacturers like Stellantis realizing that, wait a minute, we've made a boo-boo. We've got some great products with a multitude of different drivetrains, but they're not selling. People also don't want the electric vehicles. We also know manufacturers like Stellantis have said, we're going all in with all electric and our whole new arsenal of all these new electric models. But on the other side, nobody's talking to them because on the other side, electric vehicle sales are grossly down. Talk to some manufacturers like Porsche, Audi, Mercedes, and they'll tell you all about how their electric vehicle sales are going. We're even seeing manufacturers like Porsche and going full electric on their Macan. Time will tell on how that pans out. But we see the sales decline. We're seeing the retail market, the resale market on electric vehicles in the toilet. People don't want them. And yeah, there's a few anomalies and people will always swear by them. But sales are down. Sales are down on electric vehicles. Sales are down on trucks year over year. And while they are selling, trucks are always going to sell. A lot of these numbers that we're hearing is deceitful. It's lies, in my opinion. What I've been doing in the research are telling me a lot of the numbers that are coming out when we're saying, oh, GMC has announced all these sales, we're up this quarter. Ford saying, we're up this quarter. Ram saying, yeah, we're doing okay. We're selling trucks. But do you realize the majority of those sales are coming from fleets? That's companies, organizations, corporations buying vehicles for their businesses. But we know those businesses, some of them are up and down, the ebbs and flows. We know they had to wait as well for some fleet vehicles because there was a backlog. But that backlog's starting to plug off and we're starting to fill up some of those orders. So there's this massive velocity of vehicles hitting these businesses are now slowing down because a lot of their fleets are filling up. Not to mention businesses are struggling right now. People are laying off. We're hearing it all over in corporate America. People are losing their jobs. We lost, I believe there was something like 80,000 tech jobs lost this year already. Possibly a lot more than that. The bottom line is job market is down. Along with that, it's because of a lot of corporations becoming a lot more critical, looking for cost savings. And in doing so, they're going to be trimming staff, trimming vehicles, trimming costs. Well, there'll be less of a need for a lot of these vehicles. So where do you think that leaves a lot of the fleet sales? That's right. But the fleet sales are the only thing keeping a lot of these full-size OEM manufacturers going right now. And when you hear all their sales are going well and they're doing great, that's just the fleets. Behind that, peel those layers of the onion away and you'll quickly realize that the sales are not going that well. The retail market sales are in the toilet. People aren't walking in off the street to buy these trucks. And somebody will call me out and say, well, that's not true. You see new Chevys and new Fords every day. Oh, you sure you do. But how many different franchises are selling these vehicles in your city? How many of these new vehicles do you think they're actually selling? And how many do they need to sell to keep the lights on? We know that some of the manufacturers are already threatening. We know Ford's been through some ups and downs where Ford wants to isolate and basically say we want to sell direct to the customer. What's that going to do to the franchise dealers? We know that's another means of cost cutting. Ram, we know. Stellantis, the struggles are real. There's already debate about pitching some models, some brands out of the Stellantis team. We know they have Alfa and Maserati and Jeep and Ram and Chrysler and Dodge. Dodge is on the chopping block. Chrysler on the chopping block. Jeep sales are in the toilet. Ram sales are in the toilet. You know, Alfa Romeo, they're kind of holding their own in Europe. But Stellantis is making some hard moves. They've been shuffling, a lot of their CEOs or VPs and all those people are getting turfed, punted. And that's all knee-jerk responses and desperation. Things are not good in the car market. We're seeing year-over-year decline in full-size truck sales, GM and Ford. And while their sales overall are up, that underlying K factor is coming because of sales of their fleets. And I've said this already. But we've also heard manufacturers, we've heard the CEOs specifically from Ford as well as from GM both say, you know what? Our electric vehicle sales aren't doing that well. Ford's admitting to losing billions on the sales of their E division. That's right, their Mustang Mach-E, their Ford Lightnings are losing money at an alarming rate. And while they are selling, they're still losing money. So it's sort of that conundrum. But they're funding the electric vehicle manufacturing as well as the research and development with the sales of their internal combustion vehicles. So you, the customer, are paying the price. That doesn't seem fair, does it? And GM's going through the same conundrum. Their CEO has also said, yeah, you know what, we're not doing that crap hot with vehicles, you know what, the Bolt EUV, as well as the full-size SUVs that we're rocking that are electric. We know the Hummer EV, not selling that great. So a lot of these manufacturers are taking a deep, hard look at what is required to sustain. We saw Nissan, 99% profit loss in the first half of 24. Because they're giving it all away for incentives to get people in the goddamn door. If that doesn't give you signals as to what's going on in the market, and yet in all of this desperation, you know what? We're getting incentives starting to fly out the door. We're getting, obviously, Nissan struggling. We're getting, even a lot of these manufacturers like Subaru stepping up to giving incentives. Mazda starting to give incentives. A lot of these dealers are starting to throw those incentives out. But that's only due to desperation. And they think that this is a short-term blip in the radar. We're in for the long haul, folks. People are dealing with a cost of living crisis. These manufacturers are saying, well, we're not making much money on these vehicles. But people are saying, I don't have the money. I'm done. These prices are way too high. Something's got to break. And it's going to break. And a big part of this problem is the cost of operating business, the operating model. How is it that China is able to manufacture an SUV for $15,000, whereas the Americans say we're losing money selling a very similar product at $55,000? How did we get here? Well, too much fat in the corporations. Way too much fat, just like the government, the bureaucracy is so much fat, filth, and flarn that it's literally consuming so much that you have to produce 80, you need the first 50 to 60% of the manufacturing costs of that vehicle are going into staff charges. You've got to pay those CEOs $35 million a year. And then all of their minions below them. There's all these little minions. It's not just, we always take aim at the CEO. But all the little minions and the trickles and the VPs and then the managers, general managers, and all this other garbage that this middle-level fluff that consumes all of that cost. Then we can't forget about UAW and the big three taking a toll. UAW is also trying to worm their way into some of these other manufacturers here that are building on American soil, that are import manufacturers. We're seeing that. And so, as we add these extra costs, labor costs, third-party materials, supply chain cost increases, the writing is on the wall. Whether they're losing money or whether they're not losing money, they've got to become more competitive. Because people don't have the money. And yes, I know, people are still spending, people are still buying. Like I said, people just have no constitution and no governance, self-governance, and they have no compass. And the banks will lend as much as they can because the banks already know that, okay, this person's putting down 20%, they've already got skin in the game. Even if they get most of this money back, repossessions, we're still in a relatively low repossession rate. I believe we're in that 7% rate now, 6 to 7% of subprime lenders or borrowers are going to repo, whereas prime buyers are actually in a different position where they're more down in that 2 to 3%. But the point is, it's an insurance game that they know. They know that the law of averages. It's a gamble that 5% of these people, 1 in 20, is going to default on their loan. And they incorporate that into their insurance plans. They incorporate that into their losses. And that's a gamble. It's like a parasitic loss. Any business knows that there are some costs of doing business, whether it's consumables or whether it's whatever it is, whether it's some certain staff members that don't seem to be high value, but it's a nice to have because they lock the door on the way out every night and they empty the garbages. Every dealership, every manufacturer sees some of that, and banks are the same way. And so here we are in a conundrum where people don't have the money. We're seeing an ever increasing amount of people on the street, taxes rising, the printing of money has done nothing but diminish the value of the dollar. People are broke, they're stretched beyond capacity. And I know that there are still buyers out there. But that pocket of buyers used to be here, and now it's here, and it's shrinking. And so now what we're seeing is the used car market is also becoming equally difficult, because if you want a late model used vehicle that still isn't a total trash bin, you're going to pay premium dollars for that. And that's the big conundrum. The worst part is buying that late model used car, now you have to pay the higher interest charges because the banks lend at a much higher rate, typically in that 13, 14% right now for a used vehicle. But to get in a new vehicle, you might get a rate at 6, 7, 8%, where you're saving money on the financing, but you're paying more for the principal of that vehicle. So a lot of these manufacturers are playing the games and clearly continually holding the consumer by the short and curlies. The consumer's losing steam. They're losing money. It's not infinite. So what's left? Older junky cars. Go to the auctions. Continue fixing what you're driving. But there gets a point where even that vehicle finally wears out. I'm a believer in extending the life of your vehicle, getting the most out of it, because with the cost of living and the cost of these new vehicles, it means that we have to get creative. Get an extra 2 or 3 years out of your vehicle. Maybe an extra 5 years. Because even a lot of the older vehicles are better made, and even a lot of them you can wrench on yourself, whereas a lot of the new vehicles you wouldn't even dare. They're full of electrics and technology that's way beyond most people's capability. So at the end of the day, with these high monthly payments, people are running out of money. We're seeing it. And that pool of buyers that can actually afford these is slimming down to a point where we don't know where the end is. And these manufacturers are starting to see the writing on the wall. And while they're throwing incentives out there, those incentives aren't infinite. And right now, we are in the midst of a serious cost of living crisis. What is it going to take to turn this around? I don't know. I have some theories, and it's usually not good because we know historically some big events in the world are what it takes to sort of re-trigger the economy, reset and restabilize. And none of us want to think about those scenarios. But currently, the way it's sitting right now, we're beyond just this traditional cycle. We're in a real tough spot. And so the cost of these new vehicles, used vehicles, is way too much for most people to burden. And sure, we share that regularly. Relatively affordable new vehicles. Can you get a new vehicle for $30,000? Yes, you can. But remember, people are getting stretched thinner and thinner and thinner. So while that $30,000 seems like an affordable vehicle today, in 2 years, it might not be. Even if it is still $30,000, which we know that $30,000 every year, these dealers keep jacking up their prices. But every year, food's going up, rent, housing is going up. So now once you may have been able to afford that monthly payment, maybe you've been pushed out in 2 or 3 years from now. This is the stretch that people are just always just outside of the reality. And this is what's happening. People are running out of steam. And so not having the money available makes it tough. Remember, yes, those $30,000 vehicles do exist. The worst part is, though, however, there's less and less and less of them. Remember, we already said this. There's dealers that are starting to get rid of some of these lower cost vehicles. We're starting to see them obsolete, some of these entry-level vehicles. Some of them are going away, whether it's because of poor sales or whether it's because dealers and manufacturers realize that they're just making bigger profit margin to a smaller group of people, and maybe they don't care. Because I have an insider, a GM that's actually I've talked to, of one of the key manufacturers, that actually we had a good heart-to-heart and said, we really don't care about selling the volumes. We just need the big margins. As long as we're getting the margins on a smaller number of vehicles, we don't need to sell as many vehicles. And we know a lot of the dealers, the manufacturers were taking that approach. They were taking that stance of, you know what, not needing to sell the volumes anymore. That whole approach changed in 2020 when we saw the shortages, then they were coming up with creative ways to still get vehicles to market. Then they started to learn, okay, we don't have as many inventory, we don't have as many vehicles because of the chip shortage, but how can we still capitalize? We still have to provide shareholder earnings for the investors, and publicly traded companies, like we're seeing a lot of the big players, have to show profits year over year. Well, we have to show those profits, but we don't have the volumes, so we have to do something else. We have to get creative. That was one of the big creative pieces. And of course, now, on top of all of this, this transition into the electric market has you and me and everybody else paying for these electric vehicles and the research and development. Whether you want that electric vehicle or not, you're going to be paying for it. And that's just the world we're in today, and the car market just feels like we're really stalled out, pardon the pun. And with an ever-increasing cost of living crisis and jacked up prices, it's more insult to injury that we're finding these manufacturers. We're seeing Ford jacking up their prices every single year. We know sales are down, and yet we see prices like on the Ford Explorer, 13% jack up next year on the base MSRP. We're seeing a lot of these manufacturers continue hiking up prices. Just when we thought there's no way they could go any higher, guess what? They are. And most manufacturers are jacking prices up on many of their models for next year. We're seeing Toyota really taking a hard stance there. Their Supra, their new Camry, where that's all hybrid, prices going up. When is this going to end? They're jacking up prices by a significant amount. Yet you might, if you're lucky, get a 2 or 3% raise from your business or your company or your job. Most people don't, but some people do. But you're losing the grasp, and you're losing the ability, and that vision of buying that new vehicle is further and further and further out of reach every single day. Please, drop a line. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Times are tough, and I'm worried. It's troublesome. See you real soon. Bye-bye.